The wind howled across the plains of Colony 12, lifting dust and red sand into the air like ghosts swirling through the night. Out beyond the small farming outpost, far from the Capitol domes and patrol drones, there was a small house made of metal and old salvaged parts. The lights flickered, the power weak as always, and the generator in the back buzzed like a dying animal. Inside, a man sat in silence, staring into the fire screen. His name was Jack Corman. Once, many years ago, he had been a soldier. Not just any soldier. He had fought in the intergalactic border conflict, a war so brutal it had nearly wiped out 3 colonies and turned allies into enemies. He had flown ships, commanded squads, and lost everything. After the war ended, he disappeared from public life. He didn't return to Earth. He didn't speak to anyone from his old squad. He chose instead to settle on this quiet planet, one of the last places untouched by the politics of the inner systems. For years he lived alone, with only his tools, old memories, and silence. That silence was shattered by a strange noise just after midnight. At first, Jack thought it was the wind. Then came a soft thud. Not the kind of sound made by falling fruit or desert rodents. This was heavier, intentional. He stood up, his old bones creaking in protest, and reached for the rusted rifle leaning by the door. His fingers hesitated. Something in the air felt different. A pressure, maybe. A stillness in the wind. The kind of stillness that meant something was watching. He opened the door slowly, the hinges squeaking. Outside, the wind had died. The sky was dark, a black sheet dotted with faint stars. His porch light flickered once, then went out. Jack stepped outside and nearly tripped over something. It was a bundle, wrapped tightly in a blanket of dark, silky material that shimmered with faint blue light. It was small, maybe the size of a cat or newborn child. Jack leaned down, heart beating faster than it had in years, and carefully pulled the blanket back. A baby's face stared up at him, but not a human baby. The skin was pale with a soft lavender hue, smooth and almost translucent in some places. The eyes were the color of molten silver, glowing faintly even in the dark. Tiny hands curled near its face, and from the side of its head, small ridges pulsed faintly with a warm light. The child looked up at Jack and made a sound, not a cry, but a soft hum, as if speaking in a language no human could understand. Jack froze. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, to call someone, anyone. This was alien, dangerous, unknown. But as he looked into the child's eyes, he saw no fear, no threat, only sadness. A deep, aching sadness that reached inside him and grabbed something he thought had died long ago. He stood there for a long moment, the baby still and silent, wrapped in that strange shimmering cloth. Then he heard it. A voice, not loud, but soft, faint, as if carried on the wind itself. "Protect her, please." Jack spun around, rifle raised, but he saw nothing. Then, far in the distance, he caught a glimpse, a tall figure limping through the trees. The shape was humanoid, but taller, with long limbs and a shimmer to its skin. The figure paused once, looking back toward the house. Even from a distance, Jack could feel the sorrow in that look. Then the figure vanished into the trees, swallowed by the dark. He didn't follow. He looked down at the baby again. The humming had stopped. She was asleep, tiny chest rising and falling. He picked her up, carefully, unsure if it was even safe, and felt the warmth of her body through the blanket. Her skin pulsed faintly under his touch. He carried her inside. The house, cold and dark, suddenly felt different. Warmer, not just from the baby's body heat, but from something else. Jack laid her gently on the old couch and stared at her for a long time. She looked peaceful, trusting, as if she knew he wouldn't hurt her. And that's when it happened. As Jack leaned closer, the baby's eyes opened, fully silver now, glowing bright. Jack felt a strange pull in his head, like a door unlocking. Images rushed into his mind. Planets burning, ships flying through space, screaming, a woman's face, alien, beautiful, eyes full of fear and love. He saw a child being taken. He saw a battle. He heard a name. Oria. Then it all stopped. Jack gasped, stumbled back, clutching his head. What the hell? He looked at the baby. She blinked at him, no longer glowing. Jack sat down heavily, heart thudding in his chest. He had been alone for so long. He had seen death, destruction, betrayal. He had lost friends, comrades, his faith in anything good. But now here was this small, strange child, left at his doorstep by a mysterious alien woman. A child who could somehow show him memories that weren't his. A child someone, or something, had tried to hide. Why him? Why now? He got up, went to the corner of the room, and opened a dusty crate. Inside were old tools from the war. A scanner. A communicator, long disconnected from the network. A tiny worn photo of his old squad. He pulled out the scanner, turned it on. The machine buzzed, then scanned the baby. Nothing. No match. But then, a faint signal appeared on the screen. A warning. A tag. Priority subject. Do not engage. Report immediately. Jack's blood ran cold. He shut off the scanner. He looked at the baby. She was still sleeping. The peaceful alien baby, with a target on her back. The wind picked up again outside. Somewhere in the distance, a blue light flickered in the trees. A drone, maybe, watching. Jack closed the door, locked it, and pulled the curtains shut. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know why the baby had been left with him, or what danger followed her. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let anyone take her. Not tonight. Not ever. He looked at her one last time before sitting back in his chair. She stirred slightly, opened her eyes, and made a small noise. Not a cry, not a word, just a tiny, soft sound that felt like trust. Jack whispered to himself, "Who are you, little one?" And in the silence that followed, the fire screen glowed warmer than it had in years. The morning sun on Colony 12 was a pale blue orb, its rays filtered through the dusty atmosphere of the planet. Jack sat on the edge of his metal-framed bed, staring at the strange, glowing blanket draped across a makeshift crib he had built from old supply crates. The baby was still asleep, breathing steadily, her tiny chest rising and falling beneath the silky alien cloth. He hadn't slept. All night, he kept checking the scanner, disabling the transmitter, covering every reflective surface in his home, and reinforcing the doors with scrap metal. The drone light he had seen in the woods never returned, but the memory of it lingered in his mind like a splinter under the skin. The child stirred. Jack stood up and approached the crate quietly. She was awake now, silver eyes blinking slowly, taking in the rusted ceiling above her. When she noticed him, she made a soft, high-pitched coo that almost sounded like music. It wasn't human, but it wasn't threatening either. Jack knelt down and offered her a small container of synthesized baby formula, stuff he used for his livestock pups. She sniffed it, hesitated, and then took it. He sighed with relief. "All right," he muttered. "At least you can eat." After feeding her, he wrapped her again in the shimmering cloth. When he touched it, the fabric hummed faintly, like it was alive. He could swear it changed color slightly depending on his thoughts or feelings, turning soft green when he felt calm, pulsing violet when his mind drifted to fear. The child looked up at him and smiled. It was a real smile, and it hit him in the chest harder than he expected. He hadn't seen a smile like that in years, genuine, trusting, and without judgment. Jack set her down and went to the far side of the room, where his old service locker still stood, untouched for over a decade. He opened it and stared at the dusty armor inside. A few medals clung to the upper shelf, their ribbons faded. There was a photo too, him and his old squad. They were young, cocky, strong. Most of them were dead now. The war hadn't spared much. He touched the corner of the photo and looked back toward the baby. "What are you?" he asked quietly. "And why do I feel like you're already changing everything?" His musings were cut short by a loud ping from his old perimeter sensor. He hadn't heard that sound in years. His heart froze. He rushed to the console near the window and pulled up the old holographic monitor. A red dot blinked steadily just 400 meters outside his home. Something was out there. Jack moved fast. He lifted the floor panel, placed the baby gently into the hidden compartment below, surrounded her with soft rags, and closed the lid, leaving a tiny vent open. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She just looked up at him like she understood. Grabbing his rifle, Jack moved to the porch and slipped outside. The red dot on the monitor had been accurate. A figure stood just beyond the tall grass, slim, humanoid, wearing a black suit that shimmered like oil. Its face was covered with a mask. It wasn't human. At least not completely. Jack didn't call out. He raised his rifle and aimed. "State your business," he growled. The figure turned its head slowly and extended a hand, palm open. A small drone flew up behind it, hovering just over its shoulder. It emitted a low-frequency pulse, and Jack's rifle buzzed violently in his hands. He dropped it with a curse. The drone hovered forward, scanning him with a red beam. The figure spoke. Its voice was mechanical, filtered. "We detected a biological anomaly within this sector. Comply with Planetary Survey Code A109 and present the life form." Jack's jaw tightened. "You're not authority," he said. There was a pause. The figure didn't deny it. "We are here to retrieve a lost subject. The child is not yours." Jack didn't respond. His eyes darted toward the woods. No backup, no exits. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said. "There's nothing here but me and a broken water filter." The figure tilted its head. The drone behind it spun faster. "Your neural imprint indicates recent memory disruption. We detected biosignature overlap with a hybrid class entity. Surrender the subject, and you will not be harmed." Jack spat on the ground. "I'm retired. I've been off the grid for 10 years. If you're going to kill me, do it. But you're not taking anything from this property." There was silence. Then the drone buzzed higher, and for a second, Jack thought it would attack. But suddenly, a loud ping interrupted them both. It came from inside the house. A jar, one Jack had left near the baby's hiding place, had floated off the shelf and crashed to the ground. Jack's heart sank. The figure's mask twitched slightly, like it was receiving a signal. Without warning, the drone flew toward the house. Jack lunged after it, grabbing it mid-air, and smashed it against the wall. It sparked and died. The figure moved fast, inhumanly fast. But Jack was faster. Old instincts kicked in. He tackled it to the ground, punched its mask, and rolled away. The figure stood up, flickered like static, then vanished in a blink. It had cloaked. Jack ran inside, sealed the doors, and went straight to the panel. He opened the hatch and pulled the baby into his arms. She was frightened now, glowing brighter than before. The air around her shimmered slightly, like heat waves. "It's okay," Jack whispered, holding her close. "I've got you. No one's taking you." The baby touched his chest with her tiny hand. And just like the night before, images flooded his mind, this time clearer. He saw a great hall, filled with beams of light and shadow. He saw the baby's mother, tall, noble, crying. He saw a crown, shattered. He saw betrayal. He saw the woman hand the baby to a figure, not human, but kind. Then he saw Earth. And a voice whispered inside his mind, "Drexa." The word echoed in his thoughts. He opened his eyes, breathless, and stared at the baby. "Is that your name?" he asked softly. She looked at him with those silver eyes. No response, just silence. Jack stood, still holding her, and walked to his old command table. He activated the long-disabled system and typed the word into the military archive. Nothing came up. Then he tried another database. Civilian, diplomatic, lost archives from the war. There it was. Drexa, royal title of the Arkan bloodline, heir to the throne. Jack's mouth went dry. This child was a princess, maybe more, a being of power, of history, and someone wanted her dead. He sat down slowly, the weight of it all crashing over him. He looked at her. She was yawning now, the way babies did when they felt safe. Jack leaned back and whispered, mostly to himself, "So, you're not just an alien. You're the future of a people. And I'm the fool who found you." Outside, the wind had picked up again. But this time, Jack didn't feel alone. He felt like something bigger was coming. And for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid. He was ready. The silence inside Jack's home felt different now. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was charged. Like the heavy air before a storm, or the stillness in a battlefield right before the first shot is fired. He sat at his old steel desk, hands pressed flat against the dusty console, the glow of the word DREXA still lingering on the cracked screen. He stared at the baby now resting in his arms. Her breathing was soft, almost melodic, and her tiny hand clutched the fabric of his shirt as if she'd always belonged there. The symbol woven into the corner of her blanket glowed faintly, changing in shade as the light around her shifted. Jack had seen that symbol before, a long time ago, on a battlefield where the smoke never cleared. He couldn't shake the feeling that this child was not just alien royalty, but something more, something dangerous, something wanted. After a few hours of thinking and barely blinking, Jack did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He reconnected the data core embedded in his comms wall and wired it into the power grid of the house. Sparks flew as dusty circuits hissed to life. He bypassed the system's auto-reporting functions, isolating the signal. He had learned that trick during the war. There were always ways to hide when you didn't want to be found. Once the system was stable, Jack took the strange device he had found tucked inside the baby's blanket, a smooth metallic disc no larger than his palm, and placed it into a universal adapter. The moment it clicked into place, the lights in the house flickered, the wind outside paused as if holding its breath, and a low hum vibrated through the walls. Then came the voice. Not loud, not aggressive, soft, sorrowful, and unmistakably maternal. "If you are hearing this," it began, "then I am gone." Jack sat perfectly still. The baby stirred but remained quiet, eyes glowing gently. A figure began to form above the disc, a three-dimensional image of a tall, ethereal alien woman. Her skin shimmered like silver silk, her eyes deep pools of violet. She wore a long robe laced with symbols Jack didn't recognize, but one caught his eye, the same crest woven into the baby's blanket. Her face was noble, but the sadness in her eyes was impossible to miss. "My name," the voice continued, "is Elira. I am, or was, queen of the Arkan bloodline, ruler of the Seldari Starkland. And the child you now hold is named Sael, my daughter, and the last of our royal line." Jack swallowed hard. The image flickered, then sharpened again. "She was not born to rule," Elira said. "She was born to bring peace. But those who crave war, who feed on power, have destroyed that dream. My world is gone. Our allies are scattered. And the council, they betrayed me. They believe this child is a threat, not just to them, but to the balance of power across the galaxy. They want her erased, forgotten." She paused. Her projection looked downward, where Jack held the real child. "I could not protect her, not alone. So I chose a different path." Jack leaned in, eyes locked on the shimmering woman. "You, human, you are a relic of war, as I am. You know loss. You know silence. But you also know strength. You know what it means to carry pain and still choose compassion. That is why I chose you." Jack whispered under his breath. "You don't even know me." But the projections seemed to hear. "I saw you once," Alira said. "Not with eyes, but with memory. You spared a child on Calyx 9 when your orders were clear. You disobeyed. You protected life when it cost you everything. That is why I left her with you. I do not ask for love. I only ask for care. Keep her hidden. Teach her trust. Let her grow far from the hands that will use her. And when the time comes, she will know what to do." The image began to fade, static weaving across the projection. But Alira's final words pierced the silence like a blade. "She is more than hair. She is the key." The disc powered down. The room went dim again. Jack sat in stunned silence, the weight of it all pressing down on him like a mountain. He remembered Calyx 9. It was one of the darkest days of his service. The day his squad had surrounded a village suspected of harboring insurgents. He remembered the screaming, the fire, the look in the child's eyes, the alien child he had refused to kill. He had lied on the report, said the house was empty. His commander had never found out. That decision had haunted him, but now it had led him here. He looked at Sael. She was staring at the now dark disk, her little face unreadable. Then she turned her gaze toward Jack and reached out again, pressing her hand gently to his face. For a moment, he felt warmth. Not just physical warmth, but something deeper, like light cutting through years of fog inside his mind. He didn't see visions this time. He only felt one thing: connection. He blinked away the sting in his eyes and set her gently back in her cradle. Then, without a word, he opened his storage room. It was time to bring out the armor. His body wasn't young anymore. The joints ached. His back screamed every time he bent down. But the armor still fit. Mostly. He adjusted the chest plate, strapped the old utility belt around his waist, and retrieved the pulse knife he hadn't used in over a decade. The scanner on his wrist beeped once. Low-range movement. 3 blips, approaching from the east. Jack stepped outside, closing the door quietly behind him. The sun had nearly set again. The sky glowed gold at the edges, but the forest beyond his fence was already dark. Shapes moved between the trees, too fast for animals, too careful for wanderers. He counted the blips again. 3. He returned inside and grabbed the infant. This time, he strapped her gently to his chest with a reinforced carrier made from old war harnesses. She didn't fuss, didn't cry, as if she, too, sensed what was coming. Jack looked at her. "You might be a queen one day," he whispered, "but right now, you're mine to protect." He took one last look at his home. Small, rusted, half-forgotten. It had been his prison, his sanctuary, his hiding place. Now it was just a target. He stepped out the back door and vanished into the shadows of the trees, the baby sleeping soundly against his chest. Behind them, a silent black drone landed on the roof, its red eye blinking. The hunt had begun, and the man with no future was now the guardian of the galaxy's most precious secret. The trees around Jack's small home creaked in the wind as the shadows stretched long over the horizon. His breath came faster now, as he moved quickly, purposefully, with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sael, tucked securely against his chest, was silent, but her tiny fingers grasped the fabric of his old military jacket. Every step Jack took felt heavier, but with each step, he also felt something inside him awakening. An old fire, a forgotten instinct that had been buried under years of grief and solitude. He glanced back over his shoulder. The house was barely visible through the thickening dusk. The fading lights from the interior windows flickered one last time, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something that would never come again. The soft hum of drones still echoed in the distance, but Jack had already taken the first steps away from that life. As he walked through the forest, he could hear the sound of leaves brushing against the wind. The soft rustling was the only noise that dared disturb the quiet of the wilderness. But the silence in his mind was deafening. No more questions about what Sael was, no more doubt about who would come for her. He had been marked. He knew that now. He knew that whoever, or whatever, had come for Sael wouldn't stop until they had her. He had no choice but to keep moving. The cold metal of the pulse gun in his holster pressed against his ribs, a constant reminder of how serious things had become. He didn't want to use it, didn't want to fight, but he also knew that the choice might soon be out of his hands. A flicker in the corner of his eye made Jack pause. He reached for the rifle strapped across his back, the weight of it familiar, the feel of the trigger cool in his grip. He stood completely still, scanning the darkness, eyes narrowing. Sael shifted in his arms, sensing something in the air, though she didn't make a sound. It was then that Jack noticed it, the faint shimmer in the air, just beyond the reach of his vision. A flicker of movement that didn't belong. A low hum vibrated from the trees, and then, with lightning speed, a figure shot out from the shadows. It was humanoid, fast, and deadly. Jack barely had time to raise his rifle before the figure lunged at him, slamming him against the ground. The world spun around him as he struggled to breathe, the weight of his attacker pushing the air from his lungs. He didn't fight back immediately. There was no point in it. If this person, or thing, wanted to kill him, it would be over before he could even pull the trigger. But that wasn't what this was about. This was a message. The thing that held him down didn't speak. It didn't need to. The only sound was the slow, menacing click of a blade sliding from the figure's wrist. The glint of cold steel caught the last light of the setting sun. Jack's heart raced, but his mind stayed calm. He could feel Sael still in his arms, the slight warmth of her body against his chest. She was too young, too vulnerable. He couldn't let this stranger, whatever it was, take her. He couldn't let this be the end. With a burst of strength, Jack shoved the figure off of him, rolling to his feet and pulling Sael close to his chest. His pulse gun was in his hand now, the barrel aimed squarely at the attacker's chest. The figure stopped, its eyes narrowing. It was tall, almost otherworldly in its appearance. Its skin shimmered in the light, and it wore a suit that matched the one Jack had seen on the cloaked figure earlier. It was a drone, not a living being, but something much more advanced, capable of adapting to any situation. "I don't want to fight," Jack said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "But if you want her, you'll have to go through me first." The drone tilted its head, the movement unsettlingly fluid, like a machine analyzing a problem. Then, without warning, it dropped its weapon to the ground. Its hands rose slowly, as if in surrender. The air around it shifted, and Jack felt a wave of tension ripple through the trees. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the moment, the fight had stopped. The figure spoke in a voice that was both mechanical and somehow human at the same time. "We are not here to take her from you, human. We are here to help." Jack didn't lower his rifle. He knew better than to trust anything that came from an unknown source. "Help. You're an assassin. We are not your enemies," the drone said, its voice softer now. "We were sent by the remaining loyalists to her mother. We've been watching the child for days, observing the path she must take. You are the only one who can protect her now. The ones who betrayed her mother are hunting her, and we have orders to ensure she is not harmed." Jack's grip on the pulse gun tightened. He didn't lower it. The memories of the war, the betrayals, the lies, they all came rushing back. He had seen too much of that kind of talk. Empty promises. Deceitful words wrapped in shiny packages. "I don't believe you," Jack said, his voice hard. "I've seen enough to know better than that." The drone nodded slowly, as if understanding his mistrust. "You will, soon enough. But first, you must leave this place. The ones who hunt her are closer than you think. They will come for her tonight, and they will stop at nothing to get her back." Jack looked at the drone, searching its cold, emotionless face. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The drone paused, then answered, "Those loyal to the Queen, to her vision. We are few, but we are enough to protect her. For now." Jack knew there was no choice. He couldn't stay here. Not with the enemy closing in. Not with Sael's safety hanging by a thread. He looked at the drone, then down at the child in his arms. There was no question now. No more hesitation. He would leave this place, and he would protect her, no matter what it took. "Take me to them," Jack said, his voice grim but resolute. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe. Lead the way." The drone turned and started walking into the darkness, Jack following close behind, the weight of the world still pressing down on him. The forest seemed to close in, the trees now full of eyes, the wind now carrying the promise of danger. As they moved, Jack could feel the change inside himself, a transformation. He wasn't the same man he had been just a few days ago. No longer the broken soldier hiding from the past. Now he was something else. He was the protector. And Sael, the child who had fallen into his care, was the key to everything. The stars were brighter on the edge of nowhere. Jack stood on the ramp of an old freighter ship, its hull scarred by time and skirmish, its engines humming a low, tired rhythm. He stared into the void beyond the atmosphere, the sky above layered in purple haze and quiet starlight. Behind him, the drone, his so-called ally, was powering down, folding into the storage bay like a loyal watchdog waiting for new orders. And nestled in his arms was Sael, still sleeping peacefully despite the chaos that had unraveled around them. It had been 3 days since they fled his home. 3 days of hiding in abandoned cargo depots, slipping through sensor nets, and eating rehydrated ration bars that tasted like old chalk. Jack's body ached, and sleep only came in shallow waves. But none of that mattered. Not now. The ship belonged to a smuggler, an old contact Jack hadn't spoken to since the war ended. His name was Goran Reyes, and though his loyalty was questionable, his price was steep, and his ship still flew, which made him more valuable than any friend Jack had left. Inside the ship's dimly lit control room, Goran was slouched in the captain's chair, one boot resting on the control panel, the other tapping the floor in rhythm with an old Terran jazz tune. He was a thick-set man with graying skin and a cybernetic eye that buzzed faintly every time he blinked. "Didn't think I'd ever see your face again, Jack," he said without looking up, "much less with a baby strapped to your chest, like some kind of interstellar nanny." Jack didn't smile. He'd lost the luxury of humor. "I need safe passage off-world. No registry, no scans. And I need a favor." Goran sighed, rubbing his temples. "You always need a favor. What is it this time?" "Galactic police chasing you. Bounty hunters. Angry X." Jack reached into his coat and tossed a small data crystal onto the console. The holo flickered to life, showing a symbol Goran hadn't seen in years, the royal crest of the Seldari Starkland. The same crest that once flew above war-torn planets during the bloodiest days of the border conflict. Goran sat up, suddenly very awake. "You have her." Jack nodded once. "She's the Queen's daughter." There was a long silence. Goran leaned back in his seat, staring at the baby in Jack's arms like she might explode. "You realize people would kill just to know that she's alive, right? Whole governments would pay for her head, or her protection." "I know," Jack said quietly. "That's why I'm not giving her to any of them." The baby stirred in his arms, eyes blinking open, faint silver glow still dancing in their depths. She reached for Jack's collar and cooed softly. Goran watched her carefully, then lowered his voice. "Do you even know what she is, Jack? What she can do?" Jack shook his head. "I know enough, and I know she's in danger." Goran stood, the seriousness of the moment finally settling on him like a cloak. He walked to the side wall and tapped a hidden panel. A portion of the ship's interior slid open, revealing a small passageway with curved walls and pulsing lights. "Come on," he said. "There's someone you need to meet." Jack followed, keeping Sael close. The passage led deeper into the ship than he remembered, down into old, unused sections that smelled of rust and machine oil. Eventually, they stopped at a sealed door with two ancient Arcanian glyphs etched into its surface. Jack recognized them from the projection. The Queen had left. "Safe child," he muttered, reading the symbols. Goran opened the door. Inside was a small chamber lit by a soft, amber glow. A woman stood in the center, draped in flowing robes woven with silver thread. Her skin was pale blue, her eyes gold, and her hair fell in thick braids like woven starlight. She turned when they entered, and Jack immediately felt something strange, like gravity itself had shifted around her. The woman bowed slightly. "You must be the human." Jack hesitated. "Depends on who's asking." "I am Thalia," she said. "I served Queen Alira since before the stars fell into war. I've been waiting for you." Jack glanced at Goran. "You didn't say she'd be here." Goran shrugged. "Didn't want you to panic." Thalia stepped forward, her gaze falling upon Sael. The child reached toward her, fingers twitching. Thalia knelt down, touched Sael's hand, and a soft light passed between them. "She remembers me," Thalia whispered. "Even this young. She remembers the palace, the scent of jasmine trees, the song I used to sing to her mother." Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. "Can you help her?" Thalia looked at him, eyes serious now. "That depends. Do you want her to become what she was born to be? Or do you want to keep her hidden forever?" Jack didn't answer right away. "I don't care about politics," he finally said. "I care about keeping her alive." Thalia nodded. "Then we must tell you everything." For the next hour, Jack listened as Thalia explained the truth. How Sael wasn't just a royal heir. She was genetically engineered, infused with both Arcan and human DNA. A symbol of peace created in secret, part of an ancient pact between Queen Alira and a hidden human faction. She was meant to unite the two species after the war. But the council, afraid of what she represented, had betrayed the queen and declared the child an abomination. "She is the first," Thalia said, "the first child born from two bloodlines, carrying the memory of both. She can connect with minds, unlock ancient technologies, and awaken systems that haven't responded to anyone in centuries." Jack stared at the child, who now lay sleeping in his arms. "And if they find her?" "They will use her," Thalia said darkly, "to build weapons, to crush dissent, or worse, erase her memory, erase what she is, and turn her into a puppet." Jack's jaw tightened. "No," he said, "not while I'm breathing." Thalia smiled faintly. "Then we must prepare you both." She handed Jack a small crystal, pale blue, glowing faintly. "This holds her inheritance, her true name, her potential. When the time is right, she will understand it." Goran stepped forward. "You're not going to stay here long, Jack. Safe houses like this, they'd burn fast. You've got 2, maybe 3 days before someone traces your signal." "I know," Jack said. He looked down at Sael again. She was more than a child now. She was a spark. And someone had to keep that spark alive, even if it meant setting the whole galaxy on fire. The rain on the outer rim of Zethar's moon was thin but cold, dripping down in slow, icy beads that carved lines into the dirt. Jack stood at the edge of the makeshift landing zone, soaked to the bone, his boots sunk deep in the gray muck. The horizon was covered in jagged rock and metal debris from long-forgotten battles, the land scared and lifeless. Above, the sky churned with dark clouds and streaks of static lightning. The moon was a graveyard. No one came here unless they had a reason to hide or a reason to fight. Jack had both. Behind him, inside the rusted remains of a decommissioned war freighter, Sael slept quietly under the watch of Thalia and Goran. Her presence had changed. The child who once glowed softly now pulsed with something more, something Jack couldn't name. She had begun to speak in her sleep, not in words Jack could understand, but in harmonic sounds that made the walls hum and old, broken machinery flicker back to life. Even the ship's dead engines sparked when she passed near them. He tried to ignore it at first, pretend she was still just a baby. But after the second night, when her humming had triggered a 6-foot hologram of an ancient Suldari archive buried in the ship's core, Jack had accepted the truth. She wasn't just a child. She was a key. And keys open doors. But they also attract those who want them locked away forever. The warning came at dawn. A ripple across the comm channels, scrambled signals, fragments of intercepted transmissions. Thalia translated quickly, her voice growing grave with each passing second. "They found us," she said. Jack didn't ask who they were. He already knew. The same council that had betrayed Queen Alera, the same faction that sent drones to his doorstep. The same force now scanning the system for Sael like a bloodhound with teeth made of steel and politics. Jack stepped inside the freighter, rain trailing behind him in lines down his armor. "How long do we have?" he asked. Goran was at the ship's broken nav console, trying to override lockdown codes that hadn't been touched in 10 years. "An hour, maybe less," he grunted. "They're jamming long-range signals. No chance of calling backup." "We don't need backup," Jack said. Thalia glanced at him. "You can't face them alone." Jack looked down at Sael. She was awake now, lying in the corner of the room, gazing at the ceiling with wide silver eyes. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even blinking. Her little hands waved slowly through the air, drawing symbols Jack didn't understand. "She's not alone," he said quietly. He walked over, knelt beside her. "Sael," he whispered, "I need you to stay here, all right? With Thalia. I'm going to stop them before they get too close." Sael blinked slowly. Then she reached out and touched his chest. Just like before, warmth spread through him. But this time it wasn't just warmth. It was clarity. A sharp, brilliant surge of thought and feeling. Memories flooded his brain. But they weren't his. They were hers. He saw a tall tower carved into crystal mountains. He saw alien ships burning across the sky. He saw a woman, Alera, standing in a chamber of light, singing to a baby wrapped in a glowing shawl. Then he saw fire, screams, betrayal, soldiers marching, a planet falling. And finally, he saw himself, Jack Corman, standing at the edge of it all, holding Sael in his arms. When the vision faded, Jack gasped, stumbling backward. His fingers trembled around the grip of his rifle. His mind raced. Thalia watched him carefully. "What did you see?" "Her path," he said softly. "And mine." Outside, the wind howled louder, this time carrying with it the low, mechanical growl of incoming ships. Black silhouettes appeared on the horizon. Sleek, angular gunships descending in a wide V formation. They moved with military precision, kicking up dust and ash as they circled the landing zone like vultures over fresh kill. Goran cursed under his breath. "That's a full kill squad." Jack nodded once, calm now. "I know." Thalia handed him a device, slender and smooth, shaped like a shard of light. "Take this. If you fall, activate it. It will trigger her defenses." "Her what?" "She's not helpless, Jack. She was never meant to be." With a final look at Sael, who remained still, watching him like she already knew the outcome, Jack turned and walked into the storm. The first shot rang out seconds later. It was plasma-based, bright red, and it seared the ground 2 feet to his left. Jack rolled behind a pile of metal scrap and returned fire, dropping one of the lead scouts. More troops advanced, their armor marked with the crimson sigil of the High Council. No warning, no negotiation, only the cold, efficient ruthlessness of a system built on fear. Jack moved like a ghost. Years of training resurfaced with brutal precision. He ducked, dodged, fired, and flanked. His armor absorbed the worst of the hits, but his legs burned from sprinting, and his shoulder bled where a shot grazed him. Still, he kept moving. They pushed him back toward the ridge, trying to corral him. separate him from the ship. He didn't let them. He led them. At the edge of the ridge, he stopped. The kill squad surrounded him. One of them, a commander in a bone-white exosuit, stepped forward and raised a communicator. "Surrender the child," the voice barked. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he smiled faintly, fingers brushing the shard in his pocket. Then he spoke. "You really don't understand who she is, do you?" The commander tilted his head. "She's a threat to the Order. That's all I need to know." "No," Jack said. "She's the end of it." He activated the shard. Nothing happened at first, just a low hum. Then the sky cracked. A blinding beam of light shot from the freighter's core, erupting into the clouds like a flare sent across the universe. The Council troops turned, disoriented, blinded. Then the ground beneath them trembled. And from the freighter, she walked out. Sael. Her tiny feet hovered inches above the ground. Her eyes burned silver white, and her small body glowed like a living star. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply raised her hand. And the world responded. Every piece of abandoned technology in the wreck field sparked to life. Turrets, drones, even long-dead battle mechs rose from the dirt like ghosts. They stood behind Jack, like an ancient army summoned by blood and memory. The commander stepped back, stunned. "What is she?" Jack didn't move. "She's hope, and she's pissed." And then the machines attacked. Smoke curled upward in strange spirals, twisting into the gray skies like tired souls leaving the battlefield. The machines that had once slumbered in the wreckage now stood as blackened monuments, their mechanical bodies cracked and sparking, but victorious. The valley beneath Zephyr's moon was littered with debris, broken weapons, shattered armor, and the remains of a High Council kill squad that had underestimated one very small child. Jack stood in the middle of it all, breathing hard, his rifle hanging loose at his side. One side of his armor had been torn open during the fight, and blood trickled down the side of his temple, but he didn't feel the pain. Not yet. Not while the adrenaline was still pumping. Not while the image of Sael, his Sael, hovering like a star reborn, still glowed behind his eyes. She sat now beneath a half-destroyed ship wing, nestled in Thalia's arms, her power dimmed once more. The glow in her eyes had faded. Her skin had returned to its soft lavender hue. She looked normal again. But Jack knew better. Normal was never coming back. Goran paced nearby, muttering half-formed curses under his breath as he kicked a damaged drone off the edge of the ridge. "They're going to come back," he grumbled, "with more ships, bigger guns, real armies." "They don't have time," Thalia replied calmly. "What happened here won't stay quiet." Jack knelt beside Sael and gently brushed a leaf from her hair. She looked up at him with those deep, intelligent eyes. There was something ancient in her now, something that hadn't been there before the fight. Jack saw it clearly, a kind of knowing, a quiet acceptance. "She protected us," Jack said softly. "She protected me." "No," Thalia said. "She chose you." Jack looked at her, confused. Thalia's expression was calm, but her voice carried weight. She could have destroyed all of them, burned this entire valley to ash. But she didn't. She defended, not out of vengeance, but because of you. "I didn't do anything," Jack muttered, eyes lowering. "I was just a broken man with a farm, and a past full of regrets." "You loved her," Thalia said. "That's everything." Jack stared at Sael again. She cooed and reached up to touch the scar on his cheek, and the moment her tiny fingers met his skin, he saw the vision again. Only this time, it wasn't memory. It was the future. He saw her standing tall, no longer a child, but a young woman, strong, wise, with the same silver eyes. She wore armor lined with the symbols of both her people and his. Behind her stood humans and aliens alike, gathered not as enemies, but as one force, united beneath a single crest, the symbol from her blanket. She spoke, and the stars listened. Then the vision faded, and she was just a baby again, humming softly, curling into his chest like any child would after a storm had passed. "Where do we go now?" Jack asked. Goran laughed bitterly. "Anywhere but here. This moon is toast." Falea shook her head. "No, she must go to the Nexus Temple on Mirius Prime. That's where her full abilities will awaken, where the Pact of Light was first made between humans and the Seldari. There, she can begin what her mother never had the chance to finish." Jack's face hardened. "You're saying the war's not over?" Falea's eyes darkened. "The war never ended. It just changed masks." Goran groaned. "Fantastic. Now we're guardians of a space messiah." Jack stood up slowly, adjusting the straps of his gear. He lifted Sael carefully, settling her against his chest again. She sighed in her sleep, resting her head on his shoulder. "She's not a messiah," he said. "She's a kid, and she's mine." Falea smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since he'd met her. But even in that moment of peace, Jack knew what was waiting for them beyond the stars. Council operatives, mercenary fleets, corrupt governors, ancient enemies of the Arkan bloodline. Every single one of them would want a piece of this child, of her power, of the future she represented. But Jack didn't feel afraid anymore. He felt ready. They boarded Goran's ship, patched up and sputtering, but spaceworthy. Jack took the co-pilot's chair, Sael in his lap, her tiny hands already curious about the blinking lights. Goran grumbled the whole time but fired up the engines. Falea stood behind them, her eyes on the stars. As the ship lifted off, leaving the moon and the battleground behind, Jack stared out the viewport. His mind drifted to that first night, the night he found her on his doorstep, wrapped in strange cloth, glowing under the stars. Back then, he was just a broken man hiding from his past. Now, he was something else entirely. The protector of a legacy, the guardian of hope, and maybe, just maybe, a father worth remembering. As they entered the slipstream and vanished into the velvet black of space, Sael stirred one last time. Jack looked down at her. She wasn't humming anymore. She was smiling, and for the first time in a long, long time, so was he. The stars were waiting, and so was destiny. They were ready, together, forever.